Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics, and today we are celebrating a double dose of Humphrey Bogart with two of his most remarkable films. Up first is a gripping meditation on human nature and greed. Not only is it one of the most suspenseful westerns you're ever going to see, but I think truly it is one of the finest films to come out of the old Hollywood studio system. From 1948, it's writer-director John Huston's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, starring the incredible Walter Huston in an Academy Award-winning performance, Tim Holt, and of course the man himself, Humphrey Bogart. Joining me now to talk about this very unique and special film is a film historian and writer. He's the author of the book Viva Hollywood, published by Turner Classic Movies. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Luis Reyes. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Fine, fine. Thank you very much for allowing me to share and participate with you on this beautiful occasion where we're presenting two of Humphrey Bogart's films, and in particular, what many people consider his finest performance in Treasure of the Sierra Madre as Fred C. Dobbs. His descent into madness, his slow descent spiraling into madness in this film, richly deserved an Academy Award. I think even though his performance was very good in The African Queen as the grisly old boat captain with opposite Katharine Hepburn, this was really, truly magnificent acting in Treasure of the Sierra Madre. I mean, it was really way beyond what we expected from Humphrey Bogart.
Oh, absolutely. And when we think of Bogart, you go back to the 1930s, he got his start basically playing a heavy, a gangster, kind of second fiddle to James Cagney, Edward G. Robinson. And of course, in the 1940s, he kind of had a career shift as a leading man in movies like The Maltese Falcon and, of course, Casablanca. But where was Bogart at this point in his career in 1948?
Well, it was just after World War II and Casablanca. I mean, people think of John Wayne as the all-American hero, but really, for the most part, it was Bogey who was the all-American hero during the war years, really. And in this film, and right after World War II, he was doing pretty well. He was really on top of his game. He was a major box office star. If I'm not mistaken, I think he had a tremendous hit when they paired him with Lauren Bacall, Bogey and Bacall. So he was still playing that, even though he was a detective, it was still the tough guy, the
Mm-hmm.
tough, almost film noir, tough detective. So for him to turn around and do this character part, leading character part, but still a character part in the most extreme way in an unusual film, because a lot of people at first thought it was a Western. So it was really quite something. Almost the only, I would parallel it with his contemporary that you mentioned, James Cagney, when James Cagney did his descent into madness in his film that he did with Raoul Walsh that we were talking about previously.
Yeah, White Heat, which is an amazing film.
Yes. So it's a similar kind of thing in a funny way. Yeah.
It certainly has Western elements. There's a backdrop to that, and of course, having Humphrey Bogart playing, let's say a morally ambiguous character, and there certainly is a character arc he goes through. I don't want to spoil anything, but there are definitely like film noir elements to this movie. How would you classify The Treasure of the Sierra Madre?
I would classify it really as kind of a neo-Western. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
really. But it's really a character study. It really is of three men, but I mean, we've seen the plot before in other movies, but not quite like this, where uh, it's really a real character study that takes place in another place, an exotic country that's going through its own internal struggles, which was Mexico, because it takes place right after the Mexican Revolution, when Mexico still was in very, very bad, distraught shape. Yes.
Hmm.
So it really and it was shot by Huston on location in Mexico, for the most part. If you really study the film, it wasn't all totally shot in Mexico. No. The scenes where Alfonso Bedoya as Goldhat the bandit, when he says those famous lines, badges, we don't need no stinking badges. That was actually shot on a soundstage at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California. The reason why was that Alfonso Bedoya, who famously played that character, I mean, those lines have gone down in movie history. Uh, he was a real Mexican actor from Mexico. Even though he's a Mexican actor from Mexico, in order to work in the United States, ha ha, funny how things have changed.
Hmm.
You needed to have documentation, a work permit, and you also needed to join SAG. SAG is the Screen Actors Guild, which every film and television actor has to be a member of in order to work in the business. Anyway, he had to join the Screen Actors Guild in order to come to the United States to do those scenes. Even though it was an exterior scene, it was shot on a soundstage at Burbank Studios in Burbank at Warner Brothers. And also the scenes where they're actually on the Sierra Madre on the top of the mountain when they're digging for gold. That was shot in right outside of Bakersfield, California, in the Sierra Nevada mountains of California. But the
Yeah,
rest of the film was shot in Mexico.
and it comes together beautifully. You can definitely recognize the on location shots, some of the footage of like the streets, and I think it does come together with the Warner Brothers backlot footage pretty seamlessly. It works well. I mean, to me, the story is so gripping. You're invested in the character drama. Everything just blends together perfectly, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean you had Tim Holt. That's why people think of it as Western, because Tim Holt uh, famously played with Richard Martin in those westerns that he did, um, where he played a character either named Tim Holt or a character like himself. So people thought of it as a western. And then Walter Huston, who stole the movie along with Bogart, and it was the first movie and the only movie to date in which father and son, John Huston, and the son, excuse me, the father, Walter Huston, and the son, John Huston, the director, won for the same film and
And
won Academy Awards. It's the only time that's happened in the Oscars.
rightfully so. I mean, Walter Houston gives an amazing performance. If you've seen his earlier films from the 30s, I'm thinking like Congo or Rain,
Yeah.
he's unrecognizable. He looks nothing like the Walter Houston you would expect. But it is a wonderful performance. It's very warm. And then speaking of John Huston, the writer director of the film, if you're a fan of his work, keep an eye out because he does have a cameo in the movie.
Oh yeah, he does. He's the one that asked. Oh, and they parodied it in several Warner Brothers cartoons.
Hmm.
They parry that scene where he says, "Hey, would you stake a fellow American to a meal?" That's such another classic scene. And John Huston's the guy in the white outfit that Bogart hits several times for money. Yeah, he
Yeah,
doesn't
he's
reckon. He never really looks him in the eye until the till the end and then he realizes he's hit the guy for money several times.
Oh, definitely. And then also in those early scenes, we have a young Robert Blake playing a little Mexican boy trying to sell Bogart the lottery ticket.
Yes, the lottery ticket. Yes, yeah, Robert Blake, as we all know, probably best as Beretta, TV's Beretta, and yes, that was one of his first roles. Yes, absolutely. When he
He's,
graduated from being one of the Little Rascals, wasn't he? One of the or the
that's
last of the
right.
Little Rascals. Yeah, and then he
Yeah.
played an Indian boy later on a series of B westerns.
Oh, definitely. Well, that's funny. You mentioned him as probably being best known for Beretta. I don't know. I think now he might be better known for something else that happened in real life. But
Yeah, but we don't want to talk.
sure, we
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
want to.
that's yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to get into
We
that.
want to deal with the positive.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Reyes, if there's anyone in the audience who's never seen The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, what do they have to look forward to?
they have to look forward to a wonderful, wonderful film, well constructed, that takes you into really an examination of greed, of temptation, of hope, of dreams, of the importance of the human condition, and what really makes a man or a woman happy. I think it's a real moral film on what goes on when you have that, when money and greed and hopes and dreams and all come together, and suspicion. I mean, how money and greed changes you. And also, it's a fun adventure because the characters are interesting. The story is set in an incredible time period, incredible backdrops, and I think some of the finest acting you will ever see, and direction. And it's a wonderful, wonderful film, but something that's totally unexpected. Absolutely. And it's influenced filmmakers from Spielberg to Spike Lee. Spike Lee did a version recently for Netflix where he just instead of Mexico, it was three Vietnam veterans who go back to Vietnam to find the cache of gold, a payroll that was supposedly transferred from shot down helicopter that everybody had forgotten 30 years later. So it's influenced filmmakers, uh, from now, and then we've seen several TV versions of it, manifestations of it. So yeah, it really has really, really inspired many, many filmmakers. Like I said, Spielberg. So I think please sit back and enjoy a really, really absorbing tale. It really is.
Beautifully put, sir. If you're in the audience, please stick around after the film so you can hear the rest of our conversation. Without further ado, John Huston's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. That is
Oh,
such an incredible film. I think it still holds up. I mean, especially getting to see it on a big screen. I envy the people in the audience watching it for the first time that way.
oh yeah, no, it's really, really at first when I first saw it, it took as a young kid, I was absorbed by the images, but again, I was kind of disturbed by it because it is really a strong film. I was expecting, again, I thought Humphrey Bogart, Tim Hope, I was expecting maybe an exaggerated Western, because we've seen the tale where the guys find the gold and they all, how many Westerns have used that motif, or,
Right.
stolen either the stolen bank money and the guys start fighting over it, or, or they, so, but this was so unusual. And then the fact that it was shot on location in Mexico. For that time, everything was usually done on the back lot, you know. Uh, so it had a realistic tinge and feeling to it.
Certainly. Do you know when I was a kid, I remember like I would go to Blockbuster, I would rent a lot of these old movies, these old Humphrey Bogart movies from the library, and that's how I saw a lot of these films. And I remember there's the VHS tape of Treasure of the Sierra Madre that Turner had put out. And when you look at the box art, the font, it's almost like an Indiana Jones style font. You see Humphrey Bogart with the fedora. So that's what
Right.
I was expecting it. Oh, the Treasure of the
Yes.
Sierra Madre. I was thinking more of like a Raiders of the Lost Ark
Right.
type
Yes,
film.
absolutely. And I think at the time the movie didn't do that well.
Mm-hmm.
It won Academy Awards, but it was not a box office hit at the time of its release, because people were expecting either a Western or, like you said, a Humphrey Bogart type of adventure film or gangsterish. Uh, so it took, especially post-war audiences, by surprise. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
People saw especially the people in the industry saw the artistry in the movie, but audiences didn't, and they didn't care to see Bogart, descending into madness that way.
Not
Uh,
like that. Well, it does remind me a lot of, like we mentioned John Wayne earlier, when you think of, say, Red River or, even The Searchers, where we have this all-American hero or someone who's typecast as an all-American hero. And at this point in their career, they're still willing to play someone who's a little more unsavory.
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, the one I compare it to is White Heat with
Hmm.
Cagney, where he's playing a gangster, but it's a gangster that has with a mama fixation. That great scene with him in the joint where he hears the news that his mother dies and he goes
Oh,
crazy. I mean, uh, or at that ending scene where he blows up, on the oil or the gas trestle, whatever it was.
yeah.
Uh, it Bogart in this film. I don't want to. Well, we've already seen the movie, so they know the ending. Similar thing, Uh, I think audiences didn't want to see that either. Even though Bogart plays a unsavory character, you still didn't want to. You wanted to see him get away with the mules and gold, and maybe have
Right.
confrontation with his friends, who maybe caught up to him, and maybe they would come and save him from the banditos at the last minute, and
Hmm.
maybe everything was reconciled. But no,
Maybe there's a redemption arc because earlier on, when we're introduced to Bogart at the beginning, he's kind of a bum, he's a
yeah,
panhandler, he's a drunk, but he's still kind of within the Bogart mold where he's an
sure,
anti-hero and he could
yeah,
go in either direction. He could either be redeemed at the end or he could get even worse, which obviously in
yeah,
this film he goes in the other direction.
yeah. I mean, totally. And then with the beard and oh man, it was something. And there was a scene there that was cut when Goldhat actually cuts his head off
Hmm.
and his head rolls into the water.
That might have been a little bit too heavy for
Yeah. They
1948.
they didn't. Yeah, they had to cut it. They shot it,
Yeah,
but they had to cut it. Yeah, it was a bit too much. But yeah, yeah.
definitely.
And Alfonso Bedoya, his career after that movie, everybody was producing a western, wanted him as their bandito. I mean, he had like a good 10-year stretch where he played opposite Joel McCrea in westerns. He played opposite Randolph Scott. I mean, he worked with his buddy from Mexico, Pedro Armendariz, in
Hmm.
Border River, with Joel McCrea and Yvonne DiCarlo. And so he was like in one western after the other up until he died. He had an alcohol problem
Hmm.
and he died of cirrhosis of the liver. But his last big movie was The Big Country, directed
That's
by William Wyler. He played the Mexican ranch hand with Gregory Peck, and Chuck Connors and Burl Ives. That was a big movie.
that's an
And he
incredible
died,
film. That's another
yeah,
one. Yeah.
he died right after that. Yeah.
But it's interesting. Yeah, he made a name for himself being sort of typecast as these Mexican banditos. In a lot of ways, he was kind of like the proto Eli Wallach. When we look at the roles he would play in Magnificent
Yes.
Seven, of course, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Alfonso
Yes.
Bedoya was the prototype for that type
Oh,
of character.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, kind of the charismatic kind of bandit, yeah, absolutely. Deadly, but charismatic, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious too, what was your earliest exposure to this film? When do you remember seeing it for the first
You
time?
know, I saw it for the first time on TV when I was a kid. When all those Warner Brothers movies were sold to television, I was maybe 10 years old.
Hmm.
And they kept on repeating them. All the old Warner Brothers movies, James Cagney was on every week. Every Bogart movie was on every week. Casablanca. I mean, the Paul Muni movies. The story of Louis. Oh, Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. I didn't know
Yeah.
it was in color. I didn't know Robin Hood had been shot in color until I happened to go to a revival house that was playing. I don't remember exactly what they were playing, but they showed an old Warner Brothers cartoon and Bugs Bunny, and one of the characters keeps on saying, Robin Hood will soon be here. Robin Hood will soon be here. And it was a color cartoon. And then finally, Bugs Bunny says, well, hey, Doc, where is he? And then
Yeah.
they show a clip of, of Errol Flynn coming in on a vine and going, "Welcome to Sherwood Forest," and that scene was in color.
Hmm.
And then I looked it up, and sure enough, I didn't realize it was a Technicolor film because I only had a black and white TV then, and all they were showing on at that time were black and white prints. So I go, "Oh man, the movie was in color, kind of like The Wizard of Oz." I'm sure the first time I saw it, it was in black and white because all we had was black and white TVs.
Hmm.
And then when I got a color TV and they showed it that Thanksgiving or Easter, I forgot when they would show it annually, it went from black and white to color. And I go, "Oh my gosh, what's this?" I thought there was something wrong with the set. Oh no. And then I realized that that's the way the movie was made.
Oh wow! So it did have that real world effect of like Dorothy going into this entirely new world, this new
Yes,
environment.
absolutely. And it was genius. And that was part of that 1939 year where all these great films were, of the classic golden age were produced. You had, Stagecoach. We were talking about John Wayne. I mean, we had
Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind. I mean, there was a whole list of films from 1939 that just kind of like really were like when films couldn't get any better in terms of production and the whole studio system. Yes.
Right. Well, I always think of one of my favorite films from that year is The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Charles Lawton, Maureen O'Hara. And that's a film, if it had been released in any other year, it would have been Best Picture.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
because it's 1939, it's pretty stiff competition.
Right. And I didn't recognize he looked so young. I didn't realize that was Edmund O'Brien.
Edmund O'Brien, he's on again in White Heat. We're going back to White Heat. He's in that one as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't realize it was him in the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I go, "Oh
Hmm.
my gosh, you look totally different."
And he's brilliant in that movie. But going back, so as I mentioned, Treasure of the Sierra Madre was released in 1948, but it's a period piece. It is set in 1925,
Right.
shortly after the Mexican Revolution. One thing I think is kind of interesting from a historical perspective is the idea that now we make fun of, okay, look, politically, the Mexicans, the immigrants are coming into the United States. They're trying to take our jobs. We've heard it a million times. But in this film, you have the out of work, the American gringos are going to Mexico to do labor work. So what's the historical backdrop behind that?
Well, after after the revolution, the country had to stabilize itself, and they gave work to Americans because Americans still had. They gave back the interests that were taken away, um, oil interests, things like that. They needed money for infrastructure, so there were jobs in Mexico at that time for Americans, uh, because during the revolution, a lot of America always had interests in Mexico. Be it there's always been a relationship between Mexico and the U.S. because it's our neighbor, and
Mhm.
uh, but that was the historical backdrop that Mexico is trying to reestablish itself after the revolution, because the revolution took place from 1910 to 1920. So it
Mhm.
was 10 years. So they were trying to reestablish themselves. So Americans were going down there. And then even before then, Anthony Quinn's father, Anthony Quinn's half Irish, because Irish workers, Irish American Irish immigrants came to America to work on the railroads. When the railroads were finished here in America, there was Mexico under Porfirio Diaz, who was a 30-year ruler, dictator. Dictators aren't good, but they're good in one sense. They get things done because they don't have to. They don't have to deal with the legislature. I want this done; it gets done. So Irish American or Irish immigrant workers went to Mexico after building the railroads here to help build the railroads in Mexico. So there
And
was employment in Mexico. Absolutely.
and that's how we ended up with Anthony Quinn.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's his real name, Quinn. because
Yeah.
his grandfather went to Mexico, married a Mexican woman. They had a kid. He was half Mexican, half Irish. He married a Mexican woman, and they had a kid, and that was Anthony Quinn. Yeah.
Hmm. Certainly. So, we talked a little bit about Alfonso Bedoya and his career. So, your book, Viva Hollywood, looks back at Latin American actors working in Hollywood. How do you feel? I'm just curious now in this era of like political correctness and everything. And I'm half Hispanic, so the topic is very interesting to me. But how do you feel about the portrayal of Mexicans in this film in 1948?
Actually, from a representation point of view, actually, it was the end. It also almost signifies the end of the good neighbor policy. The good neighbor policy was instituted by Franklin Roosevelt in order to help better relationships between the United States and Latin America, because at the beginning of World War II, most of Latin America was under dictatorships. They were not democracies. So they had more in common with the Nazis and Hitler and Mussolini than they did with us in those terms. So in order to, because of the war, in order to better relations, because you needed rubber from Brazil, if you're going to have, the raw materials to get from Latin America, they used films to try to help with the portrayal, because most of the portrayals were usually disparaging to a lot of the South American countries, because you had the stereotypes, you know them all, the bandito, the cantina girl, the virginal senoritas, the hacendados, those kind of images of poor countries, noble peons, and where Americans go to rescue, go on a men on a mission into Mexico. Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa started out being a hero. He was probably the best known Mexican during the early part of the first century of the 20th century. But then once he started attacking American interests and he was the only person to invade the US and get away with it. He invaded, he actually attacked Columbus, New Mexico. So he became a bad guy. And so that with the bandoliers and the sombrero became even a more vicious stereotype. So, in other words, when they had all these so-called positive portrayals, Carmen Miranda, Weekend in Havana, Cesar Romero, those to kind of offset some of the things they were, but they were usually not about Latin America. It was about Americans going to Latin America, fish out of water stories. Mm-hmm. This way, on this scale, they brought back the Mexican bandit. So it kind of signified an end to, because 1948 was after the war, so it wasn't as necessary to keep the good neighbor policy going. They had other threats now, which was communism and the whole, post-war, Cold War kind of situation. Mm-hmm. So this Mexican bandit is really epitomized, but in a more authentic way, because it was shot in Mexico and it was a Mexican actor from Mexico. Yes.
Well, certainly. And even though we have the Mexican banditos, obviously Humphrey Bogart is not playing a white savior in this movie at all. So it's not necessarily the Anglos are portrayed in a better light than the Mexicans.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it was a more balanced portrayal in somewhat, and it was actually, so you had those nuances there. But in terms of Latino representation, it was still the bandit. Okay. And it was so well played and so well written that it became a stereotype in a sense, because that look, I mean, even Sam Peckinpah copied it for his, he was influenced by Huston. Peckinpah in The Wild Bunch, mm-hmm. Lieutenant Herrera, okay, played by Alfonso Arau. He wanted, that same kind of language and look to the bandits, and played by Emilio Fernandez, who played Mapache. Okay, so you have the influences go on and on. I mean, uh, and to this
Absolutely.
day, you know.
Yeah, and I always think of the scene in Blazing Saddles, and that was probably my first Treasure of the Sierra Madre reference when I saw Blazing Saddles for the
Yeah,
first time. And you see the Alfonso Bedoya look-alike. We don't need no stinking badges, so
right.
it's gone down in history.
Yeah, and that was a friend of mine.
Really?
Actor Rick Garcia played that role. Yeah, in Blazing Saddles.
Oh wow, that's an
Yeah.
amazing
Yeah.
connection.
I wanted to find out that neighborhood you told me about, because one of the things that I suspected, and now you've given validity to it, and I have to do some more uh, research, is that I always suspected that Linda Darnell was part Hispanic.
I
And
think so
so I
too.
was curious about that, because you told me that she was raised in a neighborhood in Dallas that uh, is largely Hispanic or African American.
Correct. So actually, where we're showing this movie today, this is the Texas Theater, and the neighborhood's called Oak Cliff. And there's a beautiful mural with Linda Darnell's image on it. And I want to investigate, and I do want to look into it further. I don't know how I can get in touch with her surviving family members. I don't know who I can get in contact with, but it is something I would like to look into further.
Because her real name was Moneta. That was her, and that's a Hispanic name. So, uh,
Hmm.
and she had the look, obviously. Uh, so I'm wondering if she may be part Hispanic, or there's some Hispanic background to her. And yeah, I'd be curious to try to find out if you can still find out. But
Absolutely.
I suspect
Oh,
that she might have been.
yeah, and I always got that impression watching her in all those movies, like The Mark of Zorro, Blood and Sand. She always had a very particular, distinctive look, and she always felt very authentic to those roles.
Yes. And she was very young. She was only like 17 when she
Hmm.
did the Mark of Zorro. So um, yeah, it's curious. Like I said, some because of discrimination at that time and things that were going on, uh, or even within, not only within Hollywood, but within society. People would, we always have that saying, who's your grandma? There's always that side of the family you don't talk about, or whatever. And in proper society, or even not proper society, just within families, like, well, we don't talk about, so it's
Right.
very possible, it doesn't really matter. She was a great actress, uh, and she was a beautiful woman, and she left her mark definitely on cinema history. And uh, unfortunately, she came to such a tragic end. I think way too soon, because I think she
Hmm.
would have had another second career as a mature actress. Especially on television and films. But unfortunately, well, almost like Tyrone Power, her famed co-star,
Exactly.
he died too young too.
It's
Yeah,
very, it's incredibly tragic. But, going back to your book, Viva Hollywood, and I'm interested in that, especially kind of at the height of Hollywood's golden age, the 1930s and 40s. When we see these portrayals of like Latin Americans on the big screen, I mean, eventually, yes, it would open the doors for people like Fernando Lamas or Ricardo Montalban later on. But in those earlier days, when you would get actors like Warner Baxter or whoever, Anglo or Jewish or Italian or Paul Muni to play Mexicans in those films, at that time, did the studios necessarily see it as like, okay, a Mexican actor is not going to be bankable because they're Mexican? Or was it more of a case of like, this is who the star happens to be, this is who's under contract, so let's just cast whoever in this particular role?
yeah. I think once the studios, I think things were a little bit more open during the silent days, because the studios hadn't consolidated. It was about your image. Okay, it was really about your image. It wasn't about uh, your name per se. I mean, one of the biggest actors of the early silent period was Antonio Moreno, and he rarely played Latinos. They only brought up the Latino angle when Valentino came into prominence, because everybody was looking for their Latin lover, you know. But no, I think it's when the studios consolidated and when language became an important factor. Uh, and then again, movies were made for the masses. They were kind of looked down upon. Theater was where it was at, theater actors. Um, so I think it was just a way of having actors put, it was theater. People portrayed different roles. It wasn't about authenticity. Um, an actor's an actor and can play any role. And if he's your favorite star or she's your favorite actress, you accepted it, and that was it.
Mhm.
And some people did it better than others, granted, but others weren't. And then when things started getting consolidated under the studio system and sound came in, and the foreign markets, now it became a situation. And then the production code came in, which said you can't have black-white relationships. Latinos were a little different because Latinos, even though they were Latino, they were considered white. They weren't not, even though there might have been prejudice on a real level in parts of the country, the United States, as far as the production code was concerned, Latinos were white, Mexicans were white. If you see birth certificates, it won't say Mexican, it'll say white,
Yeah.
the race.
Well,
So
that's
under
why I
the
noticed.
production code, there wasn't a problem. And Latinos had because of our varied looks, we Latinos could play Frenchman, Italian. There were even Native Americans. There was a larger, even though there was a restraint in terms of what portrayals they could portray, there was a bigger latitude. Antonio
Antonio
Moreno.
Antonio Moreno, of course, because Creature from the Black Lagoon. That's what I associate him from. He had an amazing career, but Antonio
I mean, he
Moreno.
started with D.W. Griffith. He
Mhm.
started at Biograph. He was in Raoul Walsh's first movies, uh, and D.W. Griffith. I mean, he was in The Perils of Pauline. He was the guy that rescued, in The Silence. Uh,
Mhm.
and then later on, he worked with Clara Bow. I mean, he was, yeah, but you're right. He's best known today as a character actor. When in his senior years, he played Tyrone Power's father in Captain from Castile. You're right. He
Yes.
played the professor in Creature from the Black Lagoon, and uh, he also played the Mexican vaquero in The Searchers, the one who brings John Wayne to
Right.
find his niece to Chief Scar, cicatriz, okay, in Spanish, okay?
Mhm. Right. Well, he had an amazing career, and I look at some of the character actors like him, or leading ladies like Lupe Velez, Dolores Del Rio. It almost seemed
Yes.
like in the earlier days they gave more of a break to Latinos than they even do today. Because today it's like there's like one of three Hispanic actors that are working in every film.
Yes, but because of streaming, that
Yeah,
is no longer because of streaming and all the different media platforms. There are more Latinos working today than ever before.
which is
I mean,
good. Yeah.
every week I find a new Latina. There's a Latina actress in uh, the new Star Wars with Diego Luna, Andor,
Hmm.
season 3, whatever. Ardia Arjona. Uh, I mean, there's so many and they're not necessarily playing Latino roles.
Hmm.
It's incredible. On the feature in on the feature film side, you are correct. The opportunities have been limited. Um, right now, the only one that I know of is Oscar Isaac in the upcoming Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Uh, but as far as Latino leading men,
Well,
Pedro
Pedro Pascal is.
Pascal,
Yeah, he's getting all the good roles right now.
yeah, but no, there've been few. There hasn't been as many. Women have done incredibly well.
Hmm.
Jenna Ortega, Jennifer Lopez. Selma Hayek. Look, she's on the cover of Sports Illustrated. She's 58 years old and she's in a bikini in
Hmm.
Sports Illustrated. Incredible. Penelope Cruz. I mean, some of the most beautiful women to grace the screen today are Latinas.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in a lot of ways, things are getting better. But even the movie industry now, it doesn't seem like it seems like things are changing right now. People aren't really going out to the movies the way they used to either.
Correct. You know, it's just it's because you have a big screen. I go to my son's house. He's got a giant screen, and now TV is almost as good as movies. I was watching Andor and The Mandalorian. It looks just like a Star Wars movie. I mean,
Yeah,
especially when you see it on a big screen, and my son has the speakers and all that. I mean, movies now are TV streaming is just like watching a movie. And unless you go to a big screen theater, you get the same experience at home for all intents and
exactly.
purposes, except you don't have the communal experience of watching it in a theater with 300, 400, 500 people, which
Definitely. Well, there's something to be said about watching a movie at home on a 90-inch screen, but I do think watching a movie with an audience who's invested, it does give it a new energy. You're able to experience the film in a different light.
oh, absolutely. But again, the movie palaces, if you see it in an IMAX theater in a movie palace, but now, you go to these multiplexes and they're boxes. So
Hmm.
they're not that much bigger than what you have at home, really. And I get mad when I go to the theater because they charge you so much. Uh, and then it's, oh, but we have recliner seats. And I tell the lady, if I want a recliner seat, I can stay home and go to sleep. I came here to watch a movie.
Right.
I don't care about that. Oh, you can have snacks. Yeah, but what they charge you for those snacks?
Yeah.
You know. So there's a lot to be said of for both experiences. But I think now and then kids are watching stuff on their tablets or on their phones. So that's another people are getting used to not seeing it on the big screen. So that's why again, we're only seeing the big blockbusters, the $200 million movies that have to generate an immense profit, like the Mission Impossible films, the smaller films that used to have a chance at the of getting an audience don't have a chance anymore. And
Right.
it's wound up being a lie. They said, oh, well, with 20 screens, we can always give one screen to a film that's not performing as well. And
Hmm.
that's not true. They'd rather have Star Wars or the Marvel cinematic movies in all 20 screens and give one up, to a smaller film that maybe is not getting the audience they hoped.
That's
So I
true. But
don't
every
know.
once in a while, you have a breakout hit. Like, have you seen Sinners?
Yes, that came. Yeah, that
Yeah.
that blew everybody away. Yes,
And
absolutely.
I saw it for a third time this Sunday, and it was still sold out. People were still packing them in there to see
Yes,
it. So,
yeah. It's incredible the certain films people respond to, and that's the other thing.
mhm.
Not all films, it's that rare, lucky. Was it Charlton Heston used to say, you can go in there with the best of intentions, you have the best writers, the best everything, and somehow the film doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then sometimes he says, I'm working on a film where it's chaos and all hell's breaking loose. The director's problematic, the actors, and somehow it all comes together and works.
Well, look at the film we're talking about today, Treasure of the Sierra Madre. When it
Yeah.
came out, I mean, all the ingredients are there. It's a pitch perfect film. It's inspired generations, but it took a few years before it found its audience. People just weren't
Yes.
interested at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it took 20 years to get it done because it had been in gestation for many years. And
Hmm.
it took a while for it to all come together. Absolutely.
Definitely. Well,
And
Mr.
there's a
Reyes,
cute story about the writer, B. Travan,
yeah.
who was the writer of the novel,
Hmm.
B. Travan, who was kind of a mysterious guy. And he lived in Mexico and he showed up on the set, but he never said it was him. It was him.
Hmm.
He just kind of, showed up on the set in Mexico and kind of said he was a friend of a friend, kind of thing, but he never identified himself as B. Travan. Yeah,
And that's what I've heard. Even today, we don't really know the true identity behind him, behind this
correct.
guy. So
So there's a whole mystery to that. Yeah. And I just sit back and enjoy it. I think it's one of the great films. But it's an adult film, adult in the sense that you really need to appreciate it. You have to be an adult. I
definitely.
think so. I think it's truly. I appreciated the imagery. It's almost like The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It's another film I compare it to. When I first saw The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, it was boring to me. I expected shootouts with John Wayne and Lee Marvin. The imagery stayed with me. You know, John Wayne in the big hat and the bad guy, Lee Marvin. Nobody could play it better. But there was no action in the movie. Even the confrontation, he shoots him behind, you know. So it took an adult, me to see the movie as an adult or as a young man to understand film, to see the symbolism, to see how these characters played archetypes. The same thing with Sierra Madre. When I first saw it, again, I was expecting a Western. With all the action that you expect in the Western, I didn't I didn't realize the kind of film it was until much later. But
Well,
the images, the striking images that and the characterizations did stay with me. All that left an impression on me as a kid.
right. Sometimes you're expecting an exciting Western. Sometimes you end up getting an existential drama instead, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah, but when you're a kid, you want action. You want things to move. You know, all this psychological stuff, and you know, it just doesn't play. You know, it's you want, you know, when you're a kid, you don't mind a little bit of psychology or a little bit of character, but
Yeah.
you want action. You want things to move.
Is there anything you're working on right now you want the audience to know about?
I'm working on a book now. Uh, we're in the finishing touches, um, and it's called Motorcycles in the Movies, and it's all about motorcycles in the movies. And when we're talking about motorcycles, we're not just talking about biker films. It's unbelievable all the genres that have utilized motorcycles in the movies. We're talking about Buster Keaton comedies from the silent days all the way to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, from Captain America, the Black Widow, all the way to romantic films like An Officer and a Gentleman, Richard Gere and Deborah Winger, and hey, even Harry Potter got delivered on a motorcycle. Okay,
That's
so
true, yeah.
flying motorcycle by Rubius. So yeah, so it's going to be the first book. I'm working on it with a friend of mine that deals with how motorcycles were utilized in the movies, um, not only for character but as for plot and stunts.
Excellent. And like, when is the sort of estimated publishing date for that? Do you have something in
We're
mind?
probably looking at fall of 2026.
Okay, well, I mean, that's a fascinating topic. I love motorcycles. I don't ride personally, but just as an art form, I enjoy admiring the build, and it's always fun. Anytime you see a motorcycle in a movie, you know it's going to do something interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but it's bigger than just biker movies
Right.
or Brando in The Wild One and Easy Rider. Say,
Hmm.
and motorcycles, I didn't realize, are made. Every major country produces their own motorcycles. You
Hmm.
know, Britain has the Royal Enfield. We have the Indian and the Indian and the Harley. Uh, Italy has the Ducati. I mean, and they're all been utilized in movies. Even Italy's the Vespa in Roman Holiday. You know, Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn take a joyride throughout Rome on a Vespa. So
Right.
it's a fascinating topic that's never been really explored. Again, that's what I like to do stuff that no one has really touched on before. I mean, there's been books on rebel hero, on motorcycles in terms of the rebel hero or the biker image,
Hmm.
but not the whole. expanse of how it's been used in so many different movies for to establish character, plot, uh, stunts, that kind of thing.
Right. Why not? I certainly can't wait to look forward to it. Mr. Luis Reyes, once again, thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you, and thank your audience, and thank you for allowing me to share my love for movies with all the film fans in
Well,
your audience. Thank you.
thank you. Well, it's certainly been a pleasure. Once again, I'm Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.